Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the New York Women's Foundation, I want to give you a warm welcome to Women Lead, the First 100 Days. My name is Nina Rogers. I'm Assistant Director of Communications at the Foundation. And again, we are so excited to have you here tonight. If you joined us last month at Women Lead, a conversation on social justice, we thank you and we welcome you back for this fall conversation series. As you know, we just went through one of the most historic and tumultuous elections in recent memory. And right now, we're here to come back and come together with a powerhouse panel of women, our grantee partner leaders that laid the groundwork for this election to be possible. And right now, without further ado, I want to get into tonight's conversation. Right before we get into that, just a few housekeeping things. You can join the conversation on social media using the hashtag WomenLead2020. Again, that hashtag is WomenLead2020. Please be sure to tag the foundation. We're located on Twitter and Instagram at New York Women's Foundation. That's NY Women's FDN. And on Facebook, just search us at the New York Women's Foundation. So again, without further ado, I want to welcome to the virtual stage our Senior Program Officer, Dimple Patel, to give you some more insight on the Foundation's work in the civic engagement space. Dimple, welcome.
Thank you so much, Nina. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Dimple Patel. Pronouns are she, her, hers. So glad that you all are joining us on this Monday evening for an incredibly important conversation. Some background for folks who may not be as familiar, the New York Women's Foundation really seeks to center the leadership, the expertise, the experience of women of color, and we've been very intentional about also ensuring that the transgender community also is represented. And in the last 4 years, we have established a strategy called Resilience, which really was established to respond to what we saw as emerging needs. What was emergent, how can we better support the communities that we are already in partnership with? And we realized that after 4 years of investment, centering the leadership of women of color continues to be more prevalent and more crucial than ever. And so from our lessons learned, we have decided to, over the years, also expand our borders from New York City to New York State, knowing that in order to truly support women and children in New York City as holistically as possible, we need to think statewide and really engaging other funders, other nonprofits across the state of New York to really think about what a comprehensive gender and racial justice agenda looks like so that we can really fight for a democracy that is equitable for everyone. And so I'm very, very excited to say that that's something that we've been very intentional about doing. Last year was our first year where we invested in a statewide New York cohort. And as we're approaching 2021, we are incredibly excited to really invest more resources to women of color leadership and also thinking about a civic engagement infrastructure that supports communities that don't necessarily have the platform or the voices. And so without further ado, I wanted to provide a brief background on our moderator, Sayu Boujwani, and then I will hand it off to her to help us facilitate a conversation with some phenomenal panelists. For those of you who are not familiar, Sayu Boujwani, she is the founder and president of New American Leaders, which is an organization that's based in New York City, and it does work across the country, specifically around building the power and potential of first and second generation Americans. Sayu has served as New York City's first commissioner of immigrant affairs and is the founder of SAYA, which stands for South Asian Youth Action, a community-based organization located in Queens. Sayu earned her PhD in politics and education from Columbia University, where her research specifically focused on immigrant political participation. She is a visiting scholar at Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers University and a Woodrow Wilson Visiting Fellow. So without further ado, I would love to hand off the mic to Sayu, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dimple, and welcome everyone. We are in the week of gratitude, so I am especially grateful to be moderating this conversation with three amazing women. But I want to thank and acknowledge the New York Women's Foundation investment in New York civic engagement. And I think it's worth noting that we have underinvested in our city and our state civic engagement because the narrative, the national narrative about New York is that it's a blue state, right? But a blue state that may vote Democrat for the top of the ticket doesn't always reflect the progressive values and policy concerns of women of color and low-income people in particular. And the recent, not so recent, I guess it's been about 3 years, investment and commitment that New York Women's Foundation's board and staff made to civic engagement has really propelled our organization, New America Leaders, and the organizations you're going to hear more about, really propelled us to do a lot more. And what you'll see in the 2021 cohort in Albany is a reflection of some of that work that around the country, around the state, as far up as Rochester and in Brooklyn, we had women of color go out and run incredible campaigns in the middle of a pandemic and defeat long-term incumbents who were not reflecting the concerns of their constituents. And that happened in Sunset Park, and it happened, as I said, in Rochester. It happened throughout Queens. And that's a real powerful testament to the investment that New York Women's Foundation made in our organizations. And what you're going to see in 2021 is, for those of you who are from New York, this incredible cohort of women who are going to run for the city council and help to close the gender gap that we've long had in that council. And so I just really want to remark on that not being coincidental. It's very intentional work on the part of all of our organizations that was supported by the New York Women's Foundation. And then I'm incredibly grateful to have this role to be able to reflect and process and gather strength and celebrate with the women on this panel. I'm sorry I won't be able to give them as long an introduction as Dimple gave me, but we have Glinda Carr, the only person here. Well, I guess you can see our names. Glinda Carr is the co-founder and CEO of Higher Heights. Yesenia Mata, who's the executive director of La Colmena, based in Staten Island, and Erin Velarde, the founder and CEO of Vote, Run, Lead. So welcome to each of you. I'm going to kick you all off by asking a question about how we got to this moment. And this moment is not only a historic election of Kamala Harris as vice president-elect. It's also a continued increase in the representation of women, both in Congress as well as down ballot, as well as the incredible power and civic engagement of women voters and women donors. And so if each of you could reflect based on your own work, how we got here, what did it take to get us to this moment, and reflect on these various, pillars of our civic engagement process. So I'll start with you, Glinda.
Great. So good evening. So excited to spend our time together, not only with the panel, because I haven't seen many of them, but also with the New York Women's Foundation. And so how did we get here? With underfunded, long hours, and really brilliant strategy. Aaron's like, I'm not gonna laugh. And so this moment has been, in the making. And although we actually celebrate the gains and obviously the history-making election of Kamala Harris, we have to be reminded that women of color, and particularly Black women, we're still underrepresented and underserved in our American democracy. And so for us, this is not about lifting our foot off of the gas, but also is actually accelerating the work. Because what we've been able to see over the several election cycles are two things. So, and I will speak from Higher Heights lens, we're the political home for Black women, a place for Black women to be informed, engage, and to take action. We are mobilizing and building an infrastructure to help expand Black women's elected leadership. And that being said, Black women have put more into this democracy than we've gotten back. And in 2020, Black women demanded our return on our voting investment. And that is in the form of policies that directly impact Black women, our families, and our communities, but also claiming seats at decision-making tables. Higher Heights was born out of a Brooklyn cafe between two girlfriends and work colleagues, myself and Kimberly Peeler Allen. We wanted to see a space that we could see ourselves in. what's great about this vision was in the backdrop of Brooklyn, where Shirley Chisholm broke into the political space as the first Black woman to serve in Congress. It is great to see the incremental gains that Black women have made in elected leadership. But as I mentioned, and I'll spend some more time talking about the numbers, we are still underrepresented. But what happened this cycle is that even in our losses, and there were a lot of losses of Black women who ran, there were wins. So I'll take Congress as an example. We had a record number of Black women running for the House of Representatives. In fact, 21 Black women, 48 Democrats, and 13 Republican women. A large increase, particularly for Republican women. But the bulk of those women did not win. We're sending back all of the incumbents to Washington, and we are adding 3 Black women to the House of Representatives. And so even though we celebrate that, Black women are a little shy of 8% of the population, we are actually only still 4.3% of the current Congress. And so there's work to be done. But what we've seen is that Black women can run in different types of districts, rural, urban. They can run against incumbents. They come from different backgrounds. They were veterans. They were moms and school board members. They were judges. And so this election cycle actually for me is building Higher Heights' whole work since we were founded was the 2020 strategy. And we find ourselves like 2020. And so this is about the beyond 2020 strategy. And so how do we actually take the lessons learned with the partnerships, many of the grantees, and actually accelerate our work? And then to be able to ensure that Black women have seats at all decision-making tables, and quite frankly, ensure that those seats at decision-making tables actually lead to policies that center women, women of color, and Black women.
Thank you, Glinda. I want to underline that, I mentioned Rochester. Samra Brooke, who is a Ethiopian-American woman, unseated the incumbent there. I'm trying really hard to keep this nonpartisan. She unseated the incumbent, and she ran in a district that is over 70% white. And I just want to uplift that as an example of what you're saying, that, we hear often about the successes in majority minority districts, or that we're pigeonholed, if you will, to run in certain districts. But in fact, we see, and Samra is only one example, there are plenty of examples of people who can run and win as long as they're engaging voters and expanding the electorate. Erin, I'd love for you to also pick up a little bit on some of what Glinda was saying in terms of the increase in Congress, but not the big increases that we would have expected if we were continuing the gains of 2018. And of course, anything else you want to say about Vote Run Lead's work?
Sure, absolutely. And I want to go back to and echo what Sayu and both Glinda said. The investment in organizations like ours, Sayu, Glinda, and myself have known each other for almost 2 decades and have been doing this work for that amount of time, nearly, really figuring out what are the smart strategies and what has traditionally been an underfunded sector. And post 2016, you saw this surge of women run in response to the presidential election, right? And so, prior to that was these sort of smaller organizations like ours really figuring out, how do we do a lot with a little? And then 2016 occurred, and all of a sudden the game changed from recruiting women, right? And that work of sort of changing mindsets and, trying to create cultures and conditions that women would want to step into, that a diversity of women would want to step into, to now a wave of women who were like, I'll do it. Just tell me how, right? Which was a very different shift, I think, in the sort of movement of women's political representation. And then all of us having to shift towards, great, how do we take a large swath of folks who don't have traditional political capital, right? But at the same time, use that as an asset. We rejiggered our curriculum. It's called Run As You Are, right? Because what you didn't want to lose in that shift of women who were stepping forward was the fire in the belly as to why they were stepping forward, was the life experiences, like Samra Brooke, right, in the 55th District of New York, who lived in the rural community in the urban center of Rochester, and then again in the suburbs, and went to, all the schools there, and could tell that story in a way that no one else could tell that story. And so having that shift to this wave of women who wanted to run, and we saw it in 2018, really significant gains. traditionally, this was not another wave. This was like a little baby wave after the big wave knocks you down in 2018. We had very similar numbers at the congressional level, and we've actually gone down by about 1 overall. You are seeing a greater diversity of women of color. You are seeing greater partisan party diversity. And you are seeing more women in primaries. We as an organization had a larger number of women run in the congressional races who, like Glenda, didn't make it past the primary, or we had 2 alumni running in that primary. And so I think there are, as we look at sort of the first 100 days, this is still about keeping our foot on the gas, 1,000%. This is also, I think, about being strategic now that we have national efforts. Vote Run Lead is really looking at going from a massive training organization to how do we focus on a handful of state legislatures and actually show and demonstrate in 2 election cycles, and New York will be one of these states, where if you get to critical mass, if you get to a majority, 51, 52% women, and that pool of women is reflective of the state, that you're actually going to create these little laboratories of democracy, that we have opportunities in different geographic regions around the country. And like New York City, with this wave of women who are running for everything from, mayor to borough president to all these city council seats, we can begin to show when there are majority female bodies and when those women who are running are reflective, the significant difference that women make in government. And I think that's the pedal for going forward, because the transition from voting power to electoral power is happening, and the electoral power now to the policymaking power when there are, more of us than them.
Great, and I want to definitely come back to that quickly, but I'd love for Yesenia to weigh in. I mean, out in Staten Island, there was also a highly contested race. So I wonder if you could speak, from a very local level, what the election meant in your communities, the communities that you work in, and what were some things that maybe we're not hearing the media talk about as it relates to Staten Island or more broadly civic engagement trends in the Latino community.
Well, when it comes to the Latinx immigrant community, what we have been seeing is that this community is constantly under attack. It has been under attack even before 2016. And when 2016 came about, we started seeing how this current administration constantly kept going after the Latinx immigrant community, saying certain things that about what this particular administration thought about Mexicans, right? So specifically here in Staten Island, one of the most conservative boroughs, when the pandemic hit, it was very real to our community. We started seeing how there was no type of resource coming from this administration or particularly this governor. So what happened during that specific time was that Latinx immigrant women, they said, maybe I can't run for office, but you know what? I could get involved. And what I can do is mobilize my community. And this is where I really thank New York Women's Foundation for the support that they provided to La Colmena and to the women that we have in these leadership roles. Because it's really small organizations like La Colmena that are constantly overlooked by certain funders, but with New York Women's Foundation, we receive so much support. And what happened is that these women were the ones who kept La Colmena open, that were providing food. They even, La Colmena never did food distribution, but because of them, now we do food distribution. They provided the community with economic support. They provided face masks to the community. And beyond that, now they're providing flu vaccine shots for free to the community and bringing COVID site testings to the community, to an immigrant community that is afraid to go to the hospital. One, because they believe ICE may be there. They don't trust that certain people because they don't speak their language, but we do. So with all of this, with these women mobilizing and people know them because they're like, we call them señoras or doñas, right, from the community. They would go to get people registered to vote, and they would say, hey, can you are you going to get involved in this election? And because we serve particularly the immigrant community, they would say no, because I can't vote. And they would say, well, do you have a son or a daughter who is a U.S. citizen? They would say yes. Are they 18? They would say yes. So they would say, see, you do have a voice. You have a voice in this election. It's very important for you to get involved and mobilize your community. So just seeing how this group of Latinx immigrant women were mobilizing their community, and they said, maybe I can't run, but I do have power to mobilize, right? So now we're in a place in Staten Island that it still continues being a conservative borough, but it's the same women that are shaping the island. We know that we're taking steps. I know Staten Island is very different compared to other boroughs, right? But what's happening with Staten Island is that it's slowly changing, and these women are mobilizing, and they're saying one day we will have the capability to make or break a campaign. And that's what they're doing, and I'm so proud to see the work that these Latinx immigrant women are doing on Staten Island.
I do think a lot of us, who work to help prepare women to run for office, had a major sort of fear right when the pandemic hit about how these new candidates were going to be able to keep their campaigns going. But it's been, as New York can do and as our country can do, it's been an extraordinary lesson learned to see that ultimately there's a way of connecting with constituents that, whether it's deep canvassing or whether it's providing food banks or checking with people about their unemployment benefits, candidates really use the pandemic as a way to use the concerns of constituents as a way to pivot their campaigning strategies. I want to keep on this issue of the effects of the pandemic and the general sort of economic uncertainty, health uncertainties, the extraordinary crises that immigrants are facing, all these issues that we are working not just for representation, but we're working for a voice around our concerns. So I wonder if we could speak, and we'll stay with you, Yesenia, if you could speak to, what are the urgent needs that our communities need, and how can women of color in elected office as policymakers be most responsive to those needs?
What we started seeing during the pandemic was how there was no relief provided to the Latinx immigrant community, but as well to the entire immigrant community. And that is what La Colmena eventually became, even though we are in the Port Richmond area, which serves specifically the Latino community. We started partnering up with various other communities, because what we started seeing was that what was happening with the Latinx immigrant community was also happening with the African community and various other communities. So we decided to partner up. And one of the things was that we all were going through the same situation, that there was no such a relief provided by this government and this administration. And currently we are pushing Governor Cuomo to provide a relief, to provide relief support to the immigrant community. And yet that relief still hasn't come to our communities. And what happens is that then it puts organizations, smaller organizations like La Colmena, in a situation where we deplete out of resources, right? And we're very small, but we continue providing these resources. But now with the second wave that is coming, what is happening is that it will come to a point that we will no longer have resources to provide the community. So then if we don't have them, then who's going to provide to our community? You see, so it comes to a point where we are asking for a relief support, economic relief support, and to provide to provide resources such as PPE to areas that are constantly getting infected by COVID. Specifically here in the Latinx and Black community, what we started seeing is that our communities were dying at a higher rate. Mm-hmm. So with this second wave, we are asking for economic relief support to be provided to the immigrant community, because it's heartbreaking when we hear people say, stay at home. And when you have a day laborer, an immigrant worker coming to the organization and say, Yesenia, I wish I could stay home. I wish, but I can't. And I get afraid every time I go home because I'm afraid of getting my children infected. You see, the immigrant worker, immigrant mother, immigrant father wish they could stay home, but they can't. So we are asking the governor, we are asking elected officials to push Governor Cuomo to provide economic relief to the immigrant community. And right now we have Senator Jessica Ramos asking to fund excluded workers. So the bill is there, we're just asking for support.
Well, and right now you have Andrea Stewart Cousins, who will be the Senate Majority Leader. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Glenda, she'll be the first Black woman as the Senate Majority Leader of New York State. And the New York State Democrats will have a supermajority enough to override some stuff that Cuomo is doing or not doing. So it's, it's Cuomo, but it is also now there is a woman of color at the helm to really be looking at the budget, right? Because it's these resources. So making sure that we have her ear, that, we're not just, knocking on Cuomo's door, that for these resources, we've got to really be strategic about the folks that are new. Andrea Stewart Cousins has been in the Senate a long time, but new to these positional powers, because there has been a shakeup in the New York State Senate that I actually think, with alumni of all of our programs, that are going to be really, there will be different things coming out of Albany. 2021 is going to be really interesting coming out of Albany.
And we saw in 2019 movement on bills that had not moved in New York for years. The driver's licenses, in-state tuition, et cetera, for undocumented students. Linda, I'd love to come to you now to talk about, on a more national level, like what would you like to see this administration do in the first 100 days and beyond? And are the signs indicating that we're going to get those wishes and hopes?
At the end of the day, COVID-19, well, let's start with 2020, but COVID-19, the country's racial awakening, and a discussion around how do we actually survive COVID and actually build and thrive beyond, to me is highlights the importance of elected leadership. I do think at the end of the day, this election cycle has heightened the discussion around how the leaders that you elect or choose not to elect because you didn't vote actually have a direct tie into your day-to-day life. And so I think 2020, leading out of 2020, this is a discussion about democracy doesn't begin and end on election day. And so we need to create the environment for our champions to push innovation into the way we're moving through this moment. And we have to actually put the pressure and hold our elected officials accountable. But having elected leaders that are qualified and come from a variety of lived experiences actually approaches the very policies that many of our organizations and our constituencies are fighting for. So for example, having a former educator as an elected official, having someone from the health professional, someone that comes from whose parents migrated here to have build better lives for their children. Those individuals are going to make better decisions at decision-making tables and should, and I believe will hold their colleagues accountable for building out policies that center all New Yorkers, all Americans, but also center those, as Ayanna Pressley will always say, is those closest to the vein should be closest to the seats of power. And so that's the work, not only electing Black women, but ensuring that we are moving them up up leadership, the leadership roles within their respective bodies, like Andrea Stewart Cousins, who was, re-elected, and then voted in from her colleagues as the Senate Majority Leader last session, and as Sayu said, has pushed progressive policies. Letitia James, who is being very creative in the way that she is able to use her office as Attorney General, an office that most people don't recognize the abilities and the powers to actually impact everyday women in America, not only in America, but also across the state.
I want to encourage folks to send us their questions. We're getting ready to take those. But Erin, I want to talk a little bit about, what I've been calling the Kamala victory effect. For a moment, I didn't know, I didn't realize what was happening, but there was a period sort of right after the I don't know, can we say the final election results? Because they're still coming in. But, you know, after that momentous Saturday, I had several conversations with people, women I know who are already holding elected office, who were starting to talk about higher office or statewide office.
Yes.
And first, I didn't quite put it together. And then it was within the space of a very short period of time, right? And these were women who had never before talked about or hinted at statewide office. And and then I realized that part of it was that she had won, right? That we had seen the possibility
Yeah.
that a woman could occupy one of the highest offices in the land, a woman of color, a woman of immigrant background, all of these things that it was possible. And so I'm curious, as we think about where we go from here, what are we building from here? Whether you've seen, whether, you know, all of you have seen an increased interest in your programs and an interest running for office, because as you say, the hard numbers were somewhat discouraging maybe, or not as encouraging as we would have liked, but there was this win, and I my sense is it did create an effect. So I'm curious whether you felt that way.
I do feel that way, because I think the last time we had a highly visible Black woman running for office was Stacey Abrams, and that election felt like such a punch in the gut. You know, it just that didn't feel good, right? And it left people with like, God, we are working so hard. And, you know, I think we can say with confidence that system, you know, that election was rigged, right? For lack of a better word, like very much played with to suppress the vote. There was a lot of intentionality about keeping that margin of 30, 40,000 votes, you know, in her governorship, which she would have been the first Black woman governor. You know, locally, I think a few years leading up to this, we saw some big losses, like Tashara Jones lost by 888 votes as the St. Louis mayor. So to see the win, it's like, we were kind of kidding her, like, this is what winning feels like? Oh, winning is awesome. I want to keep winning, you know, because we really have been pushing this boulder up the hill. And I think it's very palpable that she is the first woman president, right? She is so well positioned. We don't know, you know, if Joe Biden will do a second term, and in a way that we've really never had that kind of question, at least in my time, with a president, his age, et cetera. So they're like, that feels very, very real. Like you can taste it, see it, smell it, touch it. The other thing I think locally was reflected, our win rate for women of color was 71%. Our overall win rate was 55%. So the women of color that ran in these local offices are getting elected, as Glenda talked about. So there is something happening where the electability factor, like, you know, everybody was talking about how the squad wasn't going to get reelected. Come on. You know, like big major numbers, they're adding to their squad with a Cori Bush in Missouri who beat an incumbent. So that there was a little bit of a win. So we could start to actually sort of taste the labor of the hard work where these women are in these positional seats. And it is great. It is, you know, for girls and women, but I think you're right. There is an immediate effect of women in power going like, oh, I mean, I always knew I could do that job. Now I know I can win that office. And that's I think what we're feeling in the air.
I will have to just chime in on that. Absolutely agree, but I'm still I call myself the Stacey Abrams. No, I'm the petty friend. And so I'm the petty friend of Stacey Abrams and Kamala Harris. And so particularly, and I'm assuming that most of the people, you know, participating in this conversation tonight are women, is that I would challenge us to say we have to believe in the political leadership possibilities of women. And I know some of this is around culture shift. So let's not forget that the beginning of the Democratic primary, we had the most diverse field of candidates, including the largest number of women. We couldn't see past the possibilities as Americans that the Democratic nominee could be a woman, right? And in fact, Kamala Harris, you know, had to step out, and it was like a domino effect. Every time there was a woman that ended up suspending her campaign, it was a cloud around her electability. And so some of this culture shift is that we have to, like, first of all, there is no definition when you look at electability. There's no definition. That definition has been like, I want to say who potentially created it, but it slows down support. It slows down the ability to organize coalitions around supporting women. And at the end of the day, Kamala Harris suspended her campaign, had to raise money to close a budget gap. So she had to retire debt, but then emerge as the vice president candidate like nobody, like there was no other like discussion around how she got here. Now let's be clear, the world is totally different from when the Democratic primary was happening. We are in a racial awakening. We are in the middle of a global pandemic, so I certainly believe that the time created the environment for a Kamala Harris. But the political possibilities of who Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren, we can go back to a Hillary Clinton, that we have to continue to ensure that we aren't creating these artificial barriers and man-made institutional barriers for our women. But I do believe she's game changer. She's the candidate that I believe for the moment of 2020. Her multiple identities was her superpower. It was actually could have been perceived as part of her electability question. It ended up becoming her superpower. So all I say is for those, my little goddaughter who's in kindergarten has no clue about electability. She's just like every little Black and brown girl that stood at the TV going, she looks like me. We just have to, as adults, as donors, as voters, as operatives, as organizational heads, we have to believe in the political possibilities of women.
And I want to echo that, Linda, and I want to say that we want to make sure we remember that when Kamala is at the top of the ticket, because I do think that is a, we have a moment to celebrate, but the fact of the matter is that if she was at the top of the ticket, we might be seeing something very different. But let's stay with the possibility. Let's talk about Black and brown girls, young people, any of you who want to pitch in about people who are now thinking about running. We are facing both this excitement and possibility, but of course, I would say a downward spiral from the exciting slate of candidates that we had running for president. A real sense of mistrust in our democracy and in some of our elected leaders. So if we're, sitting around the fireplace giving advice, or wherever we sit around, I don't know, I don't really actually sit around a fireplace, but if we're in the metaphoric fireplace, young people interested in running for office, but feeling like they're not sure this is the right system for them, what is your advice to encourage more people to run?
Well, with La Colmena, what we started doing was we first launched a campaign called Mi Voto, Nuestro Voto, meaning my vote, our vote. And the purpose why we decided to do that campaign was because La Colmena consists of various DACA recipients. And when this election started, again, many of them started saying, hey, well, I can't vote. I don't have a voice in this election. And we started pushing and saying that, no, you do have a voice. You have the opportunity to go down your neighborhood, tell people to come out and vote. So it was through that process that they started seeing how people were listening to them. And especially young DACA recipients, young women, that they started just seeing this, that the power that they were having. Some of them, like, just seeing the power that they were having, like marching down the street and in their mics and saying, get out the vote, salgan a votar, go out and vote. It was just beautiful to see that. And when we congregated at the end and we would start talking about their experience, what they thought about, it was just beautiful to see that they said, one day, if I continue like this, maybe one day I could also run for office. And if I run for office, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to push for my family and for my friends. It was just beautiful to see how in the beginning, they thought they didn't have a voice. And now they're just seeing in the future and saying, one day when I do run for office, they're not saying one day when I can, they're saying one day when I do run for office. And so this was a very transitional process and time for these young women who are DACA recipients, young women who may not be DACA but are undocumented, but they're saying, no, one day I will run for office. And what they also saw, Kamala Harris being elected as vice president, they also, when she made that statement specifically saying the daughter of immigrants, whether or not you do agree with her policies or not, that did touch the hearts of many children of immigrants, knowing that one day you could be in that position. And I know that that's something that they felt, and now they're organizing and saying, okay, we're getting ready for next year. So it's just great to see how these young women are now thinking that one day, and they know that they are going to be running for office.
Yeah, the research from the Center for American Women in Politics that we partner with, it's our Status of Black Women in American Politics. Research actually points to the role modeling effect for women, and particularly women of color. And so when we see Black women running, winning, and leading, it actually will directly create the pipeline. And so just as Stacey Abrams and Kamala Harris are direct descendants of a Shirley Chisholm's historic run as a local elected official, you know, a congressional member, and then running for a major party nomination for president, the women that ran in the cycle are direct descendants of Stacey Abrams' political legacy. And certainly as Kamala Harris steps into her herstory, she will have literally she will create generational change for women, and then women of color and Black women in particular, where we'll be able to point to, and this is not just her ascension to vice president. I mean, she is, when Aaron and I write our book, she is a case book study of leadership pipeline. Here is a woman who ran for a citywide office, ran for a statewide executive office, ran for federal office, and not only ran for president, because we'll make sure that stays in history, but also then ascended as a victorious running mate as vice president. So, I mean, that is literally when you talk about a case study of how you run from local office all the way up to the highest office. She will, like I said, forever change how people think about their political leadership path mapping.
And Glenda's right about the storytelling, right? You have to tell those stories so that, you know, girls and young women understand that that was a lifelong political leadership trajectory. And that's not for everybody, right? There are some folks that are going to go 8-12 years in a city council, or I commit to doing 2 terms. But more of those stories, more of the commonness of this coming out, that role model effect. But, you know, I think the other thing that's changing is that there's an insider-outsider strategy now that is winning these races. And that feels very different. You don't, you know, this run as you are mantra, we had no idea was going to be so emotionally resonant, because people don't want to sell their souls to run for office, right? They don't want to have to fit very particular molds. And there is this sort of, I think, break in history where, and maybe at the sacrifice of Hillary Clinton's, you know, potential to the presidency, that we had to learn all of these things through her in order to see that diversity, I think, of political candidates who, the lock on this door does not work in our new house. So there's a small child entering. But we had to sort of say, hey, that doesn't work. Right. And I think we're going to see that with some of the very ultra conservative women that got elected on the right. You know, it's not going to actually serve their legacies. It's not going to serve their reelection abilities to sort of ride that, because at the end of the day, that honestly doesn't get rewarded for women, because at the end of the day, they're still women. Right. And there's still that deep sexism within both of the parties, particularly on the right, in rewarding the sort of women who ride and in the extremes. So there's a lot to dissect. But I also think we're going to see a major acceleration in the first 100 days. Like, if Amy Klobuchar gets selected to be in the cabinet, then someone like a Peggy Flanagan could be a U.S. senator. We would have our first Indigenous person in the United States Senate, right? Woman. If, you know, these folks that are getting selected for these cabinet positions, like this could really be one of the most, you know, there's a big campaign now for Deb Haaland to be Secretary of Interior. I just saw that today. There really could be people who are just going to look at the system and pull the levers of government very differently than we've ever seen in American history.
Wow, that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing both the pipeline examples, but also all of these possibilities. And I wanna underline the pipeline piece, because, you know, we did have a moment in 2018 where a lot of people ran, some successfully, for Congress as their first election, which can happen. But some of you are asking what advice, and I would say, you know, no office is too small. And it may never be too small for you to be there for a long time, or you may move into different positions. I think there's also the question of, you know, what happens when you are able to run as you say, Erin, run as you are, run with showing up as your whole self. And I think one of the challenges we're going to see about some of these women on the right, we were talking before the formal session about the fact that some of them are talking about their immigrant background, but if they're not owning that experience and using their lived experience to inform their policy, I think that voters start to see through that. It's not about right or left or conservative or progressive. It's about how voters feel about a candidate who seems to be lobbing off parts of their entire history and experience and personality in order to show up in a very flat way. And I think we're seeing a lot more role models, not just of representation, but of showing up fully as you are, and as who you are. I want to get to one question and then do a closing comment. So there is a question in the chat, which you may or may not want to answer, which you may have seen. Sabrina is asking if Erin and Glinda are considering an open position within the Biden and Harris administration to increase women's representation. So it's so far.
We're smiling because we literally were talking about this when we were doing the tech run through. And so I will answer this question, and there's another question about what would be your advice if you're a 23-year-old college student thinking about running for office. And it's like you have to win the primary of self. And so that is you determining what is your highest use of your time, talent, and treasure. And does that mean that is through an elected leader's lens, or is that an activist? Is that an advocate? Is that a supporter? Is that a champion? And so very early on, I developed my primary of self. And so for me, I've spent 6 years working for the New York State Legislature as a chief of staff of a state senator. I've been an advocate. I've been, you know, a volunteer. I've been a donor. I've been a nonprofit lobbyist. And so I'm very clear about we all have a role to play in this democracy. So I'm very clear about my role in the democracy. And I'm about setting the decision-making table from the outside. And that is my contributions to the democracy. So if you're trying to figure out what your contributions are, spend the holiday doing some journaling to figure out what you want to accomplish and how you can accomplish it and what types of seats you need to be able to do that. And for me, it's ensuring that I'm helping to set that table and ensuring we're helping to put women that believe that's their role in a democracy in those seats.
I think Sabrina is rooting for the Biden-Harris administration because she now is asking Yesenia if you would consider an appointment in the Department of Homeland Security. And maybe if you could just weigh in on that appointment, which came through this morning.
Well, for me personally, I would stay here in Staten Island. Staten Island in itself needs a lot of work. That's why 4 years ago, coming from the south side of Chicago, I stepped foot here in Staten Island, and I just saw the need completely that it needed when it came to organizing. And that is the work that still needs, we need a lot of, Staten Island is not the same like all other boroughs. And I think we are in a position right now where we still have a lot of work to do, and I'm really happy that I was able to meet all of these amazing panelists through the Support New York Women's Foundation, because I know we will be working together on ensuring that Staten Island has the best representation. And as for your next comment, I know right now there's various transitional process, like when it comes to the Biden campaign, but there were certain pros that we did hear from this new particular person that will be part of the Homeland Security, and they were part of the implementation of DACA. So I know DACA right now is it's in question, and again, majority of my staff are DACA recipients, and I know this is something that is constantly over their head, and they're saying every day, like, when this current administration constantly keeps attacking DACA, I could see how it just weighs over their shoulders. So right now they're just hearing this for them, they are in a position that they are feeling more calmly. But again, there's a lot of work still to be done.
Thank you. Erin, what about you? What position are you looking at in the Biden-Harris administration?
I think we might all have similar personalities, and Glenda and I just found out we're both Pisces. So I made a decision early on to remain, in this nonpartisan work, in looking to build multi-party systems within the United States. I'm really doing a lot of thinking about what it means right now for center-right women, and that there is really no political home for those women, right, who are fiscally conservative, socially more liberal. And so that this is my space in the world. And I'm not actually interested, as crazy as that might sound, to do a White House job. I also can't stand DC. Don't tell anyone in DC I said that, but I do not own a sweater set that is the same material as the top button matches the bottom button. So I am a New Yorker, and that Jersey to New York through and through. But I'm also looking at some of these reforms. Sayu, you and I have talked about this. It's not just how the government is currently set up. New York City will have ranked choice voting next year. So there are amazing women of color candidates running for mayor. And guess what? You get to vote for all of them. And nobody's like putting that together, right? So that's the stuff that excites me more so. But I am interested in making sure that there's a council and not just an office on women and girls. I think a couple of us have been on these calls. A council on women and girls means that there's a seat at the table at those daily briefings. Hi. For those daily briefings where women are, actually doing, where a woman representative would be at the, where a woman representative, hey hubby, would be at the one of 24 daily briefings every morning, right? And that gender lens would actually be as part of the daily briefings across the board. So there's a lot of ways that we can make sure we know who's getting involved.
She has something to say, so listen.
Let her say it. Let her say it.
Wants lipstick.
Oh, well, that's because she got that red lip on. She's like, look at that lipstick.
Mostly the color.
I'll say quickly that that in our in the next evolution of my work, because of some of what has been talked about, is to support women once they're elected. And so I think maybe we just have a few more minutes, and it'd be good to kind of go around and just kind of share what we are going to focus on in order to continue doing the work that we're doing, whether it's in the same way or in a different way. And just to say a little bit more, that we know that one of the challenges once women get into office is to continue to maintain this possibility of showing up as their whole self, of to continue being, in the case of those who have been activists, for example, to continue to be activists, elected officials, to ensure that they stay within the system and that we don't lose them, that we're not losing them to the system or from the system. Those are some things that, as we see more and more women of color getting elected, we want to make sure that they are getting supported once they're there. And so that's sort of where I'll be spending some of my energy in 2021 and beyond. So let's quickly go around and hear, what are the hopes and dreams you have for your work in 2021? Let's start with you, Erin.
We're really looking at the state legislative model to see how what's called Run 51. It'll be announced early in the year. How do we move state legislatures to 51%? And how do we create the kind of laboratories of democracy we want to see at the states? Because to me, this feels like a snowball effect. If we can get 4, 10, 15 states at 52, 55, 60% women in 2 or 4 election cycles, you are going to see major legislation passed on climate change, on common sense gun reform, on stuff that 70% of American women want, like paid leave. So that really is going to you'll see that be the focus of Vote, Run, Lead. And excitedly, New York is one of our pilot states, and we are hiring. So ping me if you want that job.
Yesenia?
Well, I think specifically, and I'm just going to focus here on Staten Island, right? Especially because it's always a forgotten borough. So I always make it a mission to rep Staten Island. Everybody always tells me that I'm like the proudest Staten Islander. But, but specifically here in Staten Island, I want to continue on ensuring that the Latino community continues getting involved in elections, continues to ensure that others get registered to vote. But just to continue empowering the immigrant community, just seeing what these immigrant women did during the pandemic. I want to ensure that I continue that same hope, that I continue that same, I want it to grow. And I think, again, it's going to take some time. It's going to continue a lot of organizing because that's my background. I organize, and I really love how Glenda said it, right? It's like you figure out how you're going to help, I guess, like this particular movement, right? Whether you're a writer, whether you are an organizer, whether, there's different ways that you can support any type of movement. And for me, here on Staten Island is to continue organizing the Latino community, the immigrant community. So one day we could really have somebody running for office that really represents the values of our Latino community, which is always serve others regardless of race, religion, whether you're Black, white, brown, but just to ensure that Staten Island one day becomes a welcoming borough.
Glenda, you get the last word.
I love that, Staten Island as a welcoming borough. When I first moved to New York, I had a car. And this is like over 20 years ago. And so I would actually go to Staten Island because it felt like home. Like I could go to a strip mall. And so everyone was like, you go to Staten Island? So anyway, I would go on Sundays. Anyway, for Higher Heights, we're going to accelerate our work to help Black women to vote, run, win, and lead, right? But it is also us deepening our work, right? So the breadth of work and the breadth of work. And what's been very clear in this this debate around the appointment of Kamala Harris's, replacement, clearly identifies what we believe our work is, right? And so it is deepening our work around ensuring that there are Black women in the U.S. Senate and creating that 2-year, 4-year, 6-year, and 8-year plan. And so at the end of the day, if California Governor Gavin Newsom decides not to appoint a Black woman to the U.S. Senate, and if there's all these chess pieces of the administration, if the chess pieces doesn't move for another appointment, there will not be a Black woman in a U.S. Senate. And it was over 20 years between the first Black woman, Carol Moseley Braun, in 1992, and Kamala Harris in 2016. And so that is the work. How do we ensure that we are actually creating multiple seats for Black women to lead? In addition, there's still an opportunity to create that pipeline work to ensure that we are electing not the first Black woman governor, but multiple Black women governors. And in our top 100 cities, we have major cities like New York, Boston, St. Louis, the re-elections of Atlanta, Charlotte, and New Orleans, to actually expand the number of Black women in executive office. And so that's the current year, but the way we win this is actually building out a 20-year strategy. And it's one, elevating Black women who are already governing and encouraging them to run for higher office, and identifying Black women and Black women leaders across the country to step into elected roles. And so that is the work. That's the work of what the New York Women's Foundation has allowed us to do, is actually to dream the possibilities of Black women's leadership. And that is through a fellows program that we've launched. Over the next 4 years, we will train and engage 100 Black women that I know that those 100 Black women, whatever they decide to do, from elected office to starting their own organizations, they will absolutely change the fabric of our democracy in the next 10 to 20 years.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Again, the organizations are La Colmena, Higher Heights, Vote, Run, Lead, and New American Leaders. And there's ways for all of you to plug in whatever role you want to play in helping to create the democracy create a democracy that has a place for all of us. So I hope you'll find that place and find the place that you can make the most impact. And I hope you have a great Thanksgiving holiday, get much needed rest, and then get ready for all this work that we're planning to do in 2021. Thank you to all the panelists. And I also hope you get a lot of time to rest. Take care.
Thank you, Sayu. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, New York Women's Foundation.